Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about diversity in homeschooling. And this is something I've touched on in different videos, but I've never made a specific video about it, sharing some actual specific resources and books with you. And so today, first I'm going to sort of explain what I mean by that, the purpose behind it for us as a family. And then I'll share some ideas and some specific books and things like that. But I do think it's important to kind of define what we're talking about before we get too far into this. So first, welcome if you're new, welcome if you're not new, welcome everyone. All are welcome here. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, because that's a nice thing to do, and we're nice people around here. If you are new, I make a lot of different kind of content here, homeschooling stuff, motherhood stuff. We talk about food and recipes and just sort of an all-around look at raising a big family. We have 8 children and homeschooling and all of that. So I like to share the things that I'm learning along the way, and I think we have a really fabulous community here. So I think you would like it if you decided to stick around. So let's go ahead and get into today's video. Diversity by definition simply means a variety or a range of different things. So first, let me explain why for us I feel like this is important. Number one, I think that it's really valuable to have diverse thoughts, to introduce diverse thoughts into the things that we are learning about. That's how I like to learn about things. I like to look at things from all sides and all angles, and have a diversity of thoughts in the way in which we are learning about a particular subject, especially when that subject is subjective and not objective. So diversity of thought is incredibly important to us in how we are educating our children. I also love sharing with my children different cultures. It's something that as I have gotten older, I had no idea how experiencing other cultures would impact my own life. And so it's really important to me that I open my children's eyes to that much younger than I was when I first really realized that there was like this whole other world out there that had nothing to do with me or my likes, or you know what I mean, the things that I knew culturally that were normal to me, that there's a big broad world out there, and it's beautiful, and it's full of beautiful people with diverse thoughts, with different types of food that they like, different types of music that they like, different ways that they dance. I think that there's so much beauty in that, and it has virtue and is important just standalone as is to appreciate and share those things with my children. In terms of diversifying things in schoolwork, I also like to show my children a diversity of genders and races. In terms of historical figures or current figures, different people that we're talking about, I want to make sure that all of my kids see that the possibilities are endless as to what they can do in their life, what they want to do, what they want to achieve. And that I just want them to see that there is a diverse group of people who participate in different subjects, whether it's engineering or math or science, people who become astronauts or scientists, writers, philosophers, educators or athletes or entertainers. There's so much diversity in all of those areas. Ultimately, I just want them to see the beauty of possibility around them everywhere. There's so much possibility and potential, and I want them to see that in all areas. Now, in terms of history, this is something we talk about a lot. I am learning still, let me just say that. And as I've gone down this path for myself to try to reconcile some of the things that I was taught as a child to some of the things that I know to be true now, I've found that there are holes, there are gaps in the information. Sometimes stories are told in a way that maybe depicts someone as a hero or a righteous person, instead of acknowledging that it was a lot more complicated than that. And this is again where, for me, I just want to raise my children to think for themselves. I want to raise them to be free thinkers. I want to raise them to question and look at something and say, on its face, that looks this way. But if I look at it from this angle or this angle, I can begin to unpack that this might actually be more complex. I want to teach my children to see nuance. I don't want them to be people that are just like, oh, everyone says to turn left and walk that way, turn right and run. Like whatever it is, I don't want them to feel like they need to follow the herd. I want them to be free thinkers. And so in terms of history, I think that we've kind of run this, and this is just my opinion, we've kind of run these two separate historical narratives alongside of each other. Whereas we have the version of history that is taught in our public school systems and the one that is just sort of like universally accepted among educational institutions as this is history. And then we often have, now we have, Black History Month. We have an entire month where we attempt to cram in all of this Black history as if they were not happening at the exact same time. I think, to me, my biggest goal is to mesh the different historical narratives together for a real picture of like, this is what was happening at this time. We need to use a little bit of a critical eye, and we need to be a little more willing to scrutinize the status quo and what we've been told and what we've been taught. More of a holistic look at what's happening in the entire world during these times, but what's happening across all different people groups at these times, instead of acting as though these things were happening in bubbles separate from each other. It's not. It's one history of our nation. Let's cram it all together, and let's try to pull back some of the veils that I think that we have put up in an attempt to protect ourselves a little bit from reality and truth. Certain things can be really hard to hear and really hard to address, and I completely get that. But the biggest thing that I've found as I've started to really get into learning more about our country, our government, our history, you guys know, if you watch any of my other videos about a lot of the books I read, our government, our military industrial complex, and our clandestine operations and the CIA and all of that, I understand very much how these things can control the narratives of our country and intend to drive us in a direction of fighting with each other so that we're not looking at what they're doing, to be totally honest. So I think that it's very important to me that I teach my children to question and look at things again with a critical eye, and to seek more than what is being spoon-fed to them, because what I have found is often what's being spoon-fed to you is to keep you from looking any deeper, looking any further, to keep you distracted over here. So that maybe that makes me sound like a little bit of a tinfoil hat person. I'm not a tinfoil hat person. And I do think that's part of the problem, is that a lot of times, if you are a critical thinker, if you are a free thinker, if you refuse to fall into any boxes, then people like to paint you as a tinfoil hat person because it's easier to dismiss you if they make you look crazy. I want to teach my children to examine those things. I don't want to tell them what to think. I want to teach them how to think about things, how to critically look at things. Even science, and I sometimes get flack for this, but again, we each have to do what we feel works best for our family. But every subject, I approach my children with here's the different possibilities. Well, my earring just like literally broke and fell out. So I guess I should take the other one out, because it's kind of weird to have one earring, isn't it? Well, let's just leave the one in and I'll cover up the other ear, and then you won't know. I probably shouldn't have even have told you. Okay. So I like to present information to my kids and say, what do you think about this? Instead of let me tell you what to think about this. I love presenting things to my children and asking them questions like, what do you think about that? Do you think that's right? Do you think that's wrong? What would you do? What about this? What about that? And just engaging their brains to consider different points of view in a subject. And so I get asked about this a lot. Do I only teach creation to my children? And I don't. I teach my children that there are a lot of theories out there. I share with my children all the different theories of how our world began. That's what I will say. Okay? So I love to present things to my children. I love to present information to them and ask them what they think, and to use their critical thinking skills. The next piece of this that I think is critically important is that we need to come from a posture of not being afraid to be wrong or needing to retract. Whenever I talk about this subject, I get a lot of questions about like, well, where do you start? Is there a curriculum that has a more accurate picture of history and whatever? And there's not. One doesn't exist right now. And it's largely in part due to, again, the education system. If you are a teacher, I love you. Please know that. I never share anything about homeschooling in an effort to be the sort of antithesis of teachers and schools. I think teachers and schools and public schools are incredibly valuable. I'm passionate about education as a whole. But I will say that in terms of curriculum and the things that are taught, specifically as government is handing down to schools what to teach, how to teach it, we end up with a lot more things that feel like indoctrination and not education. So it can be hard to peel apart the layers, but I would say put one foot in front of the other and start. As you start to look through some different materials and books, and as you start to question and look at it for yourself, you will begin to find rabbit trails to follow to find more information. So there isn't a all out there like history curriculum or something that just covers it all that I know of. If someone knows of one, please enlighten us all. But at this point, I don't know of one. So we are left to sort of sparse things for ourselves. So we just need to put one foot in front of the other and move forward and be okay with that. We might make a mistake. We might miss something. We might teach something that is part of the traditional narrative that maybe isn't entirely true. And we can go back and we can correct that later. We can go to our kids and say, hey, listen, you know, I always grew up believing that this was the way it was, but it turns out there's more to the story. Come, let me tell you. Come, let me show you. We all screw up, and people who pretend like they don't, that's a problem for them and for those around them. So I want to teach my kids a little bit of like humility and acknowledgement that like, hey, you know what? I was wrong. So let's go discover some more truth, some more information. So don't be afraid to start just because you don't have all the answers. That's what I will say. And then the last thing is, ultimately at the end of the day, education has the greatest impact in changing a lot of the problems that we are dealing with in our world. And so I am just incredibly passionate about raising children that have curious minds. The curiosity in my own mind has really peaked over the last few years. I didn't care about a lot of these things 10 years ago. I would never have sat down and read some of the books that I read now, but I think there's just different times in our lives where we're primed for it and we're ready, and that was my time. And so being sort of a lifelong learner and being probably dangerously curious about things, I want to sort of plant those same seeds in my kids. And you can't force someone to care about things. You can't force children to care about learning about certain topics, or you can't force them to love any part of education. But I just know that children tend to be what they see you doing. And so I want them to see me learning and reading and discovering and questioning, so that they know that that's okay and they can do the same thing. So that was a very long-winded way to explain why I think this subject is incredibly important. All right, so in terms of actual books and things that we like to utilize, I'm going to show you some different things. Again, this list is by no means exhaustive. I just grabbed some different things out of my homeschool room to show you. Again, this all just kind of comes with a posture of curiosity and wanting to consider things from different angles. So I do a lot of research on my own on different topics. It does require a lot more work. It's not something that is just like open and go, buy a curriculum and open and go. It does require a lot more on behalf of the parent. But again, that all is part of the reason that we homeschool. So I don't have a problem with that. Okay, so I want to first, I've talked about this series before, but the Who Was series. These books are fantastic. I don't know how many of them there are total, but it is a wonderful way to take a deeper look at individuals throughout history. And this one is on George Washington Carver. And it's, again, there's lots of historical figures that they haven't written books about yet, but it is an ever expanding book collection, and it's one that we love adding to our collection to take a deeper look at some people that might be sort of just passed over in history at different times, like just casually mentioned. And again, it's also very important to me that I'm showing all of my children in our different literature. I think that a lot of times when we're sharing, particularly, for example, Black people throughout history, we're often sharing stories of slavery and civil rights, and those are all important things that need to be discussed, and I'm not in any way advocating glossing over those historical events. But I also want all my children to see that, like, hey, guess what? There's been amazing Black scientists and inventors and doctors and all of these different fields of interest and intellect, and that it's not, Black history isn't summed up by slavery and civil rights. So I want to make sure that I'm expanding that for my children, and that they're seeing, again, women and diverse groups of people in all of these different areas of history. One of my favorite things is to look for unseen things or untold stories. There's a few different pages that I follow. If I remember, I will link them down below. But I always end up finding like fascinating stories about people throughout history that I'm like, I had no idea. I'd never heard of that person before. And learning their stories, you think to yourself like, oh my gosh, how did that not make it into a history book? But anyways, I saw this at Target a few months ago, and it's an unpublished Black history from the New York Times photo archives. So these are all unseen photos from the New York Times photo archive, and they all have, you know, whatever the picture is, the unseen photo, and then some explanation of it, what was going on in the world, what, you know, why that picture was taken, and all of that. Some beautiful ballerinas here, all kinds of stuff. Again, adding in things like this to what we have available. You guys know we have a lot of bookshelves and stuff, so our kids are very welcome to just come and take things and look at things at different times. And then I will look for different books like this. So this book, for example, is Black History Kids Edition, but this is Great Kings and Queens of Africa. So again, I like to look at these, learn a little bit about them, and then I might choose to dive a little bit deeper into certain people. If my kids show a special interest or something, then we might look into more. Looking for resources like this. Love this book, Women in Art. 50 Fearless Creatives Who Inspired the World, and it's stories of 50 different creative women, from photographers to sculptors to painters. Georgia O'Keeffe, a pioneer of American 20th century modern art. Again, just showing my kids that there are people outside of the sort of standard story and standard artists that we hear about, standard musicians that we hear about, that there are people in all of those different areas that we might not have ever heard of. Black pioneers of science and invention. And again, making sure that my kids see that throughout history, people of color were a part of science and engineering and invention, and in ways that didn't end up making the mainstream curriculum. And I'll leave these books linked down below if you're interested in this. These are 50 True Stories of Daring Women of God, Courageous World Changers. Lydia Dara, A Patriot Spy. If you saw my books I read in May, I read the book A Woman of No Importance, and it was an incredible story about a woman, Virginia Hall, who was a spy, and I mean, arguably one of the most dangerous spies, a truly important figure in World War II and the French Resistance, and her story is incredible, and I had never heard anything about her. This is another one, Women in Science, so 50 Fearless Pioneers Who Changed the World. And just remember that you don't have to agree with every single thing that is in these books. You don't have to agree with every single person. It's great to open up conversation, even if it's to share a person that you see as problematic, or that you don't think should be revered as a hero. My mother always taught us that even if we didn't agree with someone, we should be able to, if we have a stance on something, we should be able to argue the opposition side almost better than we can argue our own side. And so it's been important to me to make sure that I'm not just living in a bubble and I'm looking at things from different angles. And even if I disagree with something, I want to know why I disagree with it and how I can make their argument better than them, so then I can poke holes in it. Okay, so 25 innovators, inventors, and trailblazers who changed history, Wonder Women. This one's relatively new to my collection, so I haven't really looked through this one yet. This one has some cool Q&As and stuff like that in here as well. Little Leaders, Bold Women in Black History. And this one's Amazing Women, Over 100 Lives to Inspire You. This one, I can't remember. I think I got this one from Usborne. Rosa Parks. So yeah, this again, by no means is any of this stuff exhaustive. I just grabbed a few things off of my shelf to show you from different things that we have done or added. And you know, when I'm going to the bookstore, when I'm buying used books for my kids, when I'm buying children's books, I look around for diverse stories about different cultures, different people groups. You know, it should tell you something that the three of our favorite books this year, Esperanza Rising, this book opened incredible conversation for my kids. A story about a girl coming from a very wealthy life in Mexico to work at a labor camp in California. So, and it opened up a lot of complex questions about immigration and labor laws and all of that kind of stuff. So great book. Long Walk to Water, Sudanese, North Sudan and South Sudan. This was a great look at religion and government colliding and how it affects a people. And civil war and civil unrest. So many great questions to open up and talk about, but also leaving space for us to open up and talk about the Sudanese culture and learn a little bit more about it. We've really enjoyed adding like unit studies to some of the books that we do that give us some great jumping off points to look deeper into again, like different cultures. And if we're reading about a book from someone who's from another country and we want to look at the types of food that they eat, the type of clothes that they wear, and learn a little bit more about their culture, we get it on a personal level in the book, and then we can look a little bit more into it through our unit studies. Daughter of the Mountains was another great one as she crossed through and experienced multiple cultures. My kids had tons of questions about that and wanted to learn more. Casto, about the Blackfeet Indians and capturing their first elk dog, which is a horse. Again, opening up great conversations about the ways that they lived, why they did certain things, the sort of nomadic life that they had, the tools that they utilized, things like that. So just really looking into other cultures and humanizing. I think stories do such a good job of humanizing people. So something might seem on its face to be so different from the way that we live that it's almost hard to understand, like, oh, well, I mean, why would you do that? Why would you live like that? Why would you choose this? Why would you? But when we read the story from someone's perspective and humanize it, it helps to sort of bridge the gap, because the reality is that as humans, we have a lot more in common than not, even when we don't share the same skin color, gender, or culture. So that's it for today's video. I'll leave all this stuff linked down below. I'll also link you guys to some other resources that I can't like physically show you down below in the description box as well, if you are wanting to diversify some things in your homeschooling as well. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. I hope y'all enjoyed. I'm gonna go try to repair my earrings, see if I can glue it back together, because these are my earrings from Uganda, and I'm gonna be really sad if they are permanently broken. I don't think they are. I think I can fix it. I'm gonna go fix it. I hope y'all have a fantastic day, and I will see you guys again very soon. Bye.
One last ticket before it's gone.